Thank you, everybody. Hapaday, good morning.
Hapaday.
Welcome to the 20th installment of the University of Guam's Presidential Lecture Series. I believe this series started in 2009, and we've had several guest lecturers throughout the course of the last 4 years. And now we'll be hearing soon from Mr. Diosdado Banatao, venture capitalist and entrepreneur with ties to Guam. At this time, I'd like to recognize some of our special distinguished guests this morning. First of all, the 10th President of the University of Guam, Dr. Robert Underwood. And his spouse, Dr. Narissa Britannia Underwood. Dr. Anita Enriquez, Interim Senior Vice President at the University. Mr. David O'Brien, Vice President, Administration and Finance. Dr. John Peterson, Assistant Vice President, Graduate Studies, Sponsored Program. Dr. James Selman, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Mr. Mark Mendiola, Executive Director of the University of Guam Endowment Foundation. Mr. Richard Randall, Professor Emeritus of Marine Biology. I'd also like to recognize the Honorable Bayani Mangibin, Consul General, Consul of the Philippines. The Honorable Edgar Thomas Auxilian, Consul of the Philippines. The Honorable Maria Paz Cortez, Consul of the Philippines. At this time, I'd like to introduce the 10th President of the University of Guam, Dr. Robert Underwood.
Buenas and hapaday. And I want to recognize also, Jonas didn't introduce himself. That's Jonas McAvoy. But it's a great day for the University of Guam, as it is almost every day. Every day is a great day at the University of Guam. It's just getting better and greater. But we have a very special guest with us this morning, Mr. Dado Banatao. And he comes from very humble origins in the Philippines, from northern Luzon. And he has a very interesting story about how he became an engineer, how he went into pilot training for Philippine Airlines, how he was hired by Boeing, how he met his wife, Maria Banatao in Seattle, and eventually he went into the computer business and he invented a couple of items which all of us are using even today, and some of us are not fully aware of it. And then he decided to take a slightly different turn. He went into in the investment business, and he's now the managing partner of Tallwood Enterprises. I wish it was Underwood Enterprises. It's just Tallwood. And he's a very successful entrepreneur and a very successful engineer. And now he's he's exploring all the possibilities on how to help, particularly the Philippines, develop as a country in terms of science and technology. And so what he's bringing to us today is a very unique perspective that is based in a strong background in higher education, strong background in science and technology, and a strong understanding of how an economy works. That's a pretty unusual combination. And now he's in sharing his thoughts and listening to him, and I've learned a great deal from him this past couple of days. He's really opened my eyes to other possibilities that we could pursue here at the University of Guam. Of course, on a much smaller scale, but somewhat the same basic principle. And so his connection to Guam was his father was here as a contract worker in the 1950s, and he worked for Diosdado Enterprises. And during that time, his father, he was a little boy, and And then his father eventually went back to the Philippines, and the basis of some of the money that his father was able to make, and the drive and the spirit and the commitment to education contributed that to Dado, and Dado is very proud to proclaim to anyone who will listen that his father is his hero. And so, you know, next time you see contract workers or H2 workers, don't think of them as just, you know, people just walking around doing things, you know. There's a life story and a life spirit to every single human being on this island. And we love to celebrate that, we love to profit from that, and we love to give our students particularly the opportunity to see their own growth potential through the life experiences of distinguished individuals. And so I present to you Mr. Diosdado Banatao.
Thanks, Robert. Good. Yeah, it's still morning. Good morning. What I would like, to talk about this morning is to describe a little bit the high-level reasons or initiatives why we do a lot of things that we do today when it comes to technology. And sometimes it's hard to connect, but I just want to describe that first, and then finish it off with what we do in Silicon Valley, because it is one of the best examples where the results of what one can do with technology is just truly amazing. And it is not, hopefully after some level of explanation, it's really not that hard to do if you are properly set up. So I will describe a little bit about an ecosystem that works. And the best example again is Silicon Valley, and then there are other centers in the US and in some parts of the world that is very similar with that kind of infrastructure or ecosystem. Dr. Underwood also mentioned the fact that I've started years ago to work with the Philippine government to attend to poverty. You know, I'm sure you guys are involved with some level of philanthropy. Certainly with Maria, my wife, we started to do that about 15 plus years ago, and all in the U.S. and in the Philippines. In the U.S. side, working with the university system, primarily UC Berkeley, and we did things there that is in line with the passion that Maria and I have in terms of how we can use technology to solve a lot of the difficult technologies for the interest of society. So that's probably the first instance, and this was about, I would say, 10 plus years ago now, where we reduced our idea for philanthropy in terms of serving society in general, and that's all encompassing, whether it's in the US, Guam, Philippines, and other countries. And then we also attended the community there, again, all about science and engineering. In the Philippines, some simple actions in scholarships, but over the last 5 years, working with the government, 6 years to be precise, in the need to build this ecosystem that I will talk about later as the foundations of a thriving and developed economy. Because there is a direct connection there. I am not an economist, but I did a lot of research on work done, a lot of them sometimes theories, but having connected with a couple of Nobel laureates, sometimes meeting with the Federal Reserve Board presidents in San Francisco to understand these concepts and why using Silicon Valley as an example, why that small region in this part of the world can actually produce a lot of value, such that if you separate Silicon Valley as a country, it will surpass a whole bunch of countries in terms of GDP size. And so there's something there because Silicon Valley is just unilaterally focused, or singularly focused on technology. And so let me describe the need for a lot of technology. Some of the studies prove that, and I didn't do this myself, my research was about discovering those studies proven by real techniques in economic analysis and metrics. A top organization formed by Nobel laureates and other economists from different countries, developed countries, did this growth study. And the theory behind that, of course, is that why are there only limited amount of developed countries after World War II? And there are a whole bunch of other economies, other countries that are still in a developing state. Clearly that is disturbing, because what usually comes with a developing state, they found out, is that there's a lot of poverty. The Philippines is a good example. And so because I am Filipino first and foremost, I just happened to have worked in the US longer than, or actually I haven't really worked in the Philippines. My first instinct after school, college, was that I became a pilot with Philippine Airlines, and then I moved to Boeing. So no experience there, but knowledge accumulated therefore in Silicon Valley, being there, stayed there after graduate school. Now, the link to a developing economy, they proved, was that there has to be a few catalysts to begin to excite that economy into potentially in the future, if it is a sustained effort, could be a developed economy. And fundamentally, and this is not a discovery, in most cases, if there is enough savings in a local economy, that is then plugged back into investments, which then excites the economy more growth. But even those developed economies with enough savings would not have grown that fast if it did not access the global market. Because if you look at the size of the global market, that is infinitely bigger than just a single local economy. And the problem is much more accentuated if you consider a developing economy. In other words, it does not, by all statistics, does not have enough savings to excite the market to a growth state. And in those cases, that usually results in more rich people becoming richer and the poor stay the same way. And so now you can see in many developing countries that it is so clear that that's what you see. The middle income somehow just does not get support, whether it's from the government or from the economy itself. Merely there are a lot more consumers than producers. The developed economy, however, have a lot of that. And so they do have the capacity to invest in other developed economies. And so what you see now in a global economy today, which is now therefore by definition, it is very easy to do selling of products everywhere if you do have those products into the global market, because it is open. The global market is open. Now, other countries put some artificial blocks in there, but eventually it will be opened up. So these foreign direct investments then become the first tool for a developing economy to excite its economy because of that size. But for that to come, they discovered in that study that technology is the first enabler to that foreign direct investment. And after some investigation, it's actually obvious because most developed economies are looking for more expertise for their products, where they can design their products, and there are many, many examples of that. And sometimes, like in the case of China, it does not have to be pure scientific or engineering knowledge that they're looking for. Sometimes they're looking for a capacity to produce complicated or technology-based products. So China started, just like Japan was years ago, in manufacturing. But in whatever form those investments come in, it brings back more technology and knowledge to access global markets, knowledge about the global markets. So you can see that once that foreign investments come into a developing economy, let's just say the Philippines, you get more technology as a result. And it doesn't matter whether it's a manufacturing type of technology or a more sophisticated technology where you can innovate in products and in some cases services. So the loop is basically closed on that basis. And what we did initially, therefore, in the Philippines, as just an example, is to begin a massive effort. We have convinced the government to start the process of producing a lot of scientists and engineers, whether it's PhD level or masters, to just keep on producing a lot more of these people who have the capacity to do more research or to teach, and then eventually the industry absorption will be there. We, right or wrong, put the blame on the academe, therefore, because what usually happens when there's not enough focus on that is the quality of education in those fields are not good enough to compete. And so hence the scholarships, not only to build the foundation, but to bring in a lot of that quality knowledge in engineering and sciences. And there are many ways to intervene besides the scholarship. You can bring in research institutes, which we're about to do in the Philippines, working with the top institutions from the world. In this case, UCSF, which is very prominent in the health sciences, and UC Berkeley for information technology. And so you can intervene that way. It is a well-known fact also that it is in fact faster to learn than, it is faster to learn innovation in the school system than if you have to go out and do some invention yourself. Invention is very difficult to do, so you should just learn it, and it is faster, lesser investment cost. So in this case, if a local economy or a country does not have that pool of capability, then bring in those who already know, and then teach your local population that way. So this is all the work that we've been doing in the Philippines, and we are beginning to see some of the results. Now the growth in the Philippines, which is exposed out there, good growth lately. A few of us believe that that growth is simply because the government is cleaning up. There is so much more capability if you just take away the impediment that is there for businesses to grow, for investors to go in, as simple as that. But unless you have that thriving population that is at the value add category, which technology usually is, it's hard to grow from there. And that has been proven also. In fact, there are cleaner, I call more sanitized governments than the Philippines. But still, without that base, it's hard for them to grow. So there are a lot of these conclusions derived from research. And so that has to be the first step. You have to have that capability in your population to be able to do a lot of these value-added products and services. It can move countries. And even much more, it can move just simply regions or smaller environments. Like Silicon Valley, that's really what enabled Silicon Valley. So now, that is the reason why we do all of this work, not just for knowledge sake. Of course, there's always that need, and I understand that pedagogy is always that, hey, we will do research for research's sake. I would not advise that for developing countries. You have to do that with the one intention that there are government priorities, and that has to be served first before simple education. Because then it's just wasted. And the problem is that that country becomes strictly just a consumer and not a producer. So there is more imbalance in the system, which is very, very hard to recover without the help of these disruptors, that knowledge that can disrupt all of these foreign imports in any country. So in the Philippines, we had started to do a lot of that stuff, more in the information technology, where we did a lot of very good engineering work, for example, in communications, like Wi-Fi, where we tweaked Wi-Fi a little bit, and now we can go Wi-Fi up to 6 kilometers, and so on. And then we have instantiations of client-server computing, similar to the cloud, but infinitely cheaper for the Department of Education, and so on, with a little bit of help from Silicon Valley, of course. So, a lot has been asked about what made Silicon Valley the way it is today. And it is worth mentioning what I just went through, because the result is what Silicon Valley is today. There was already the beginning roots of that ecosystem that what made it today the way it is. And you know, in a lot of the invitations to give a talk a while back and up to now, the easy thing to ask is, please describe Silicon Valley to us. And really that question is based on, please tell us what you guys are doing now. And if that is all I would describe, then it is very, very difficult to understand why it is that way. And even in the Philippines, starting back in the early 90s, every time I go back there is always a question or a request for a meeting. Please sit down with us. We have our executives wanting to ask questions and so on. And I did that. But after years of doing that, I realized that, I realized it myself, there has to be more background information that need to be said, so that maybe what I was saying at that time can be understood. And so there is an ecosystem that is behind this whole thing. So let me describe that a little bit more. If you have read a lot of, and there have been a lot of articles on this, that Stanford University played a major role in one of the most successful companies early on, and in Silicon Valley. And that was Hewlett-Packard, was initially funded by the Dean of the College of Engineering at Stanford to enable Bill Hewlett and David Packard on designing the first oscillator, which was used by the US military even during World War II. It was a very, very basic instrument, but it enabled a lot of electronic instruments because it is a basic function in any electronic system. It is the source of synchronized clocks, and systems work on clocks and so on. So I don't want to be technical here, but it was very useful. And then there was Varian, and there's a whole bunch of others. Now, that's maybe just one little example of a financial support as part of the ecosystem. The other thing is, in that part of California, there are still today, and now they're adding more universities. At that time, there was UC Berkeley and Stanford, very prominent on the engineering side, to produce a lot of those initially top engineering minds that went into the industry. And then, of course, those companies, once they started properly funded, they went outside to bring other engineers from the East Coast and other parts of the US. But primarily, they had to derive from those two schools. And they were small, obviously beginning in the early stages, and then they grew, and then they imported more. To where today, Silicon Valley is the highest concentration of PhDs and masters and just plain Bachelor of Science engineers that continuously crank out a lot of these technologies. Now, the Bay Area or Silicon Valley has grown to now include the health sciences. Biotechnology now is growing so fast and getting a lot of money from investors. UCSF is a very, very prominent university in that field. There is also a sector of both Stanford and Berkeley that produces a lot of that expertise. So I would claim that Silicon Valley itself is transforming the landscape. Why? Because those institutions saw to it, and the state government gave a lot of money to establish research institutes to instantiate a lot of the research that these universities started and create those technologies that are necessary for health and information technology. So you can see that there is a very, very tight relationship between the university system, the government, whether it is state or federal. The federal, of course, has always been a very prominent source of money for the entire US system of research, whether it's a federally funded national laboratory or universities that have specific expertise in different fields. They fund those things, those research. And there was an article from Wall Street Journal about 4 months ago now, where the writer researched where all of these technologies that these very, very successful companies came from. Where did this come from? Who funded them? And the article was titled, "The US government is still the largest venture capital, at least in the US, but I would venture to say probably the world." Simply because a lot of the research, the research activities they funded came about in a very big way used by industry. So I am a venture capitalist, and we usually, of course, put out a lot of money into startups in Silicon Valley alone and other parts of the US and now foreign. We put money anywhere where we think it is an important idea to solve some really tough problems, and then maybe from there we can profit from those ideas and from those technologies. But funding from the government just dwarfs that. Keep in mind, we are funding in Silicon Valley alone, depending on the economic cycle, anywhere from $6 billion to $10 billion every year. Right now it's a little bit low, we're still in the 8 billion. But before the recession in the US, it was 10 plus, sometimes 11 billion per year. a lot of companies are getting very, very good money. And so it is no surprise, therefore, that it is a region that is so productive in technology that can create large, very profitable companies. You know, Apple, it is one thing that is hidden because it is in the ecosystem, in the infrastructure, and that is not usually talked about. Apple is the most profitable of all companies delivering that platform, their smartphone. They are being outsold in units per for the smartphone, but because clearly they have a lot of innovation there and able to research, we pay dearly for that because of its ease of use. It seems easy, but there's a lot of foundation that was put in there to be able to do those kinds of functions. You know, to do iTunes, they had to spend a lot of money to put their own ecosystem in place. And if you look at why, or part of the reason besides the user interface that Apple really cleaned up or owned that space, is because of their own ecosystem like iTunes. They enabled the entire community to develop applications for that platform. They're not the only one developing those things. It's just a tool for thousands of creative software engineers to add more to that, which makes it more sellable for the users. And so you buy it. But a lot of that research there has been done long before. The processors, the chips, the software, a lot of the architectures were derived from past work. And that's the thing that we should, I just want to mention that there are a lot of inventions, there are a lot of innovations. Without the foundation, a step-by-step process, layers of innovation underneath that, without those, a lot of those inventions would not work. A lot of my work in the PC, which, at least one or two of them had extended into other platforms now. There were things in there already that I had to base my innovation on. If you take that away, it would not work. The same thing with the next generation of innovation. It has to rely on that ecosystem of technologies that is already there for that innovation to work. And so if you look at the big scale, Silicon Valley is in its simpler form, it keeps on reinventing itself, and that's why it is hard to understand. But implied with that are the foundations of the building. First and foremost, that institution that has to keep on training engineers, scientists. Two, there is the US government that keeps on giving grants. Three would be what we typically call now, from an investment point of view, the venture capitalists, the intelligent money. Now, it is intelligent only because we have been entrepreneurs, we have been engineers in the past, we were entrepreneurs building our companies, and now we invest. That knowledge, that accumulated knowledge of designing products, of starting companies, managing companies properly, and now into putting money into startups is hard to do. It takes a long time. And so while it is good that you have the ability to get, technology is available to you, you still have to build a company, which at the end of the day describes what we typically call now entrepreneurship. And so when we talk about entrepreneurship, in most cases, whether you read it or you attend a conference, they talk, obviously, rightfully so, about what is it to be an entrepreneur, but In most cases, it is lacking simply because there is no mention as to the different expertise that are necessary underneath that, so that these entrepreneurs can make their decision properly. There's a lot of assumptions, of course. And as an investor, when we invest, we see that, of course. But that's where we come in. We substitute for that lack of knowledge. If without that third leg, I would say, and even in Silicon Valley, it's a very high fallout rate. And that's why I always say entrepreneurs, whether they know it or not, they are pretty much suicidal. They know they will fail. It's just simple statistics. I am one of those. I know that 9 out of 10 I will fail. But it's just that one thing that you think you are good at, that you think no one is attending to, that you think you can solve, and that you have the money to spend to innovate. It's hard. And so it is even harder if you take away the foundations of that ecosystem that Silicon Valley has today. In most cases, my summary answer to inquiries is even today is pack up your bags, get away from your job or whatever, live in Silicon Valley for at least 2 years, and then you can begin to see what's happening. All the different activities that go on. You begin to learn that and embed yourself in that community. And you will feel the weight of that ecosystem. It is really heavy and thick. It is so hard to take away now. So hard. People try to compete against Silicon Valley. Okay, unless you have that 40 years of accumulated knowledge in all the different aspects of building a thriving economy in a 10-mile wide by 25 miles long, and that if it's a country, the GDP is way in the top 10, it's hard to compete because it keeps on adding more layers. And so the ambition even by other states in the US to match or rival the Silicon Valley is good, they get up to a point, but then they go and import a lot of expertise from Silicon Valley anyway. Okay, well, that's hard to do too because of the salaries. And we have a hard time in Silicon Valley sometimes hiring from other states because real estate is so expensive simply because of the salary base of the people there. And so that's a problem for us, but we find ways to fund them anyway, so not just cash, but we give them ownership in the companies, assuming that they are that good. And so that's how we keep on acquiring expertise and keep on building that ecosystem or foundations of a thriving technology-based economy there. California has gotten to, just like other states, because of this CD swap problem we had in 2007 and 8. But if you isolate Silicon Valley, it's a little bit better than most averages in the US. Again, simply because of that ecosystem. And there has been a lot of entrepreneurship programs, and I talked to your computer science students, and you had a question earlier. And also in other countries, a group from your investment club, and then a group from entrepreneurship club. And they had some really good questions. We could have stayed for another 2 hours to answer a lot more, but even if we had spent half a day more, we probably just skimmed the top of a lot of the fundamentals of how to be successful in building technology-based companies. But it's just had to do that, to go through that process and be patient and so on. Importing could solve that problem in a faster way. In other words, what I said earlier about technology itself, which is learning is faster than invention. And in learning, you have to have a teacher. So it is not necessary to duplicate the failures. It is only good to do the successes, and it's through learning that you do that. Now, I have to comment on this because not only in Guam, not only in the Philippines, entrepreneurship is now almost a required, I don't know that it's a course, but activity between the business department and engineering. And I've seen that everywhere. At Berkeley, of course, we make sure that those departments are closed. They have this program that combines both expertise. Occasionally I give a lecture there, but it's all over the world. And I'm pleased to see that there are such activities here at the University of Guam. And maybe the private industry can participate in that. And in fact, they should. I just don't know the capacity of the ecosystem here in terms of instantiation of technology knowledge into real products. Because at the end of the day, that is the end result, and that's where a thriving economy comes from. Being just a consumer economy is hard to grow. How do you grow your economy? It cannot be just all consumption, because then you have a very, very imbalanced consumer and producer state. So that, I hope, helps a little bit on clearing up ideas on why we need technology, what its contribution to economic development, why we need to build the school system, industry, research, and so on. They all come together. There is no going around that, in my experience. Anyone, and I have observed other countries, that misses one big leg, for sure, at least you will struggle and you may never ever get there. That's the initially theory, that's the practice, and it works. Thank you.
I believe we'll open the floor for questions. And we have Evocado here with the mic.
Good afternoon, Mr. Banatao. Afterday Mabuhay, welcome back to Guam. Hope you're having a great time with the memories that you had on here.
I have a very good course there.
Excellent.
We toured the island yesterday, and I was so shocked that there are 2 Mabini stages here.
Yeah, in my younger days I lived in Mabini Street.
Sorry, okay.
So, I'm an entrepreneur. I own the first Remax in the Philippines, so we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about technology. I started saying this in the Philippines, started a year ago when I opened up the business, and the phrase that I would say is, they know what they know. And so I have problems there, but technology is one of the areas that I wanted to hone in because we talk about technology. And I don't know, maybe it's they know what they know, but the biggest irritant for me is the phone system in the Philippines, technology. They have 3 big companies, Sun, Globe, and Smart. The problem that I have is you can't call. You know, if you have a Smart, then you can't call Globe, and something like that. Or if you're going to call a landline, you have to use a landline to call a landline. You can't use a mobile phone to call a landline. There are systems in place that allow that, but it's some are available and some are not. Okay? And then there are huge dead zones. Like I'm on the 30th floor of a building and I drop calls and things like that. So I'm trying to do business in the Philippines, and I thought that the technology there was like this, but you know, you're in Guam, and you can call a landline, or you can have IPNE, and you can call a Docomo, and it's no problem. And my question is, why is it like that in the Philippines? You know, is it bad technology, or they know what they know, or is it because there's 3 companies and they want to get the market share, or whatever? But how come in the United States and in Guam that's not a problem? And that's my I guess it's a question, or it's I'm looking for answers, because I'm irritated every day that I'm there and I'm trying to make phone calls.
Why do you go there? I'm just kidding, of course. You're expanding your business, that's good. And they have a big market for consumers, and you're okay. But let me propose at least two things. One, from a technical point of view, yes, you can solve that problem. Guam is already the US system. And so it's not a matter of, therefore, the solution. There is a solution to that problem. The two tough contributing factors to that situation: one, they are so competitive that they cannot see the big picture. They don't like to connect to each other because they try to kill each other, which is crazy that there's enough population there to make money. And in fact, they could be a lot bigger in revenues when there is no hesitation to call. There will be more traffic. But somehow they don't like to look at it that way. They just want to compete. Now, by the way, Smart bought Sunseller. So that's now one, and now the competition is diminished to 2. And in fact, there was a government, and they may still be looking at that from what we call in the US antitrust. The big issue also is the government. They don't have policies that promote openness for the population's benefit. Okay. In other words, if you look at the government here, the US, they look at the consumer as their customer, not the big companies. And then a lot of why we are so happy that we have connectivity in the US, even if you have 20 interconnects before you communicate, that's because the government said, no, you will do it this way. They don't have that, unfortunately. So that's the one thing that is hard to fight.
As you know, in the Philippines, having more than one phone is common. You know, you have a small, you have a globe, you have a sun. In Guam, one phone, that's it. You know?
Or you have 2 SIMs in one phone.
Like this one.
See, there you go. That's a solution. That's a technical solution to that problem. But it is so cumbersome. I mean, it's crazy why you do that. So, no, it's, I would say, I would prioritize the government as the problem first, because they can always say, you will do it this way. You don't care, they don't care, therefore, or the government should not care whether there are fierce competitors. For the good of the public, they should do something. That's what you're seeing there. Then the next issue of coverage. That is more of a business decision. If you go to the outlying areas, remote areas, it's hard to make a business case of installing a very expensive base station, especially if it is 4G, when you don't expect revenue to sustain that capital investment. And so it's simply economics. And in fact, that could be an opportunity for yet new provider, but done in a way that is infinitely cheaper, that can be scaled up to the rest of the country. And I was there for a meeting with some of the CEOs, young and old, and we talked about that. And I think there's an opportunity to actually outdo them and be more ubiquitous and provide even more bandwidth. If I go back and spend the time there, I probably would start something like that. You just cover the entire Philippines with a much cheaper, much faster, high bandwidth capacity network. And then, during the process, include other institutions like schools and everyone else, provided almost for free. So,
Okay, Dado, this is a question that's prompted partly out of that, but partly out of our conversation yesterday when you were talking about providing, Wi-Fi across the Philippines. So, and I asked you, what about for just covering Wi-Fi all of Guam? And you said, oh, that's pretty easy, because it's a very confined area. So, the question, of course, for us here would be, if somebody proposed that, there'll be a lot of local companies will say, oh, that's impossible, there'll be this, there'll be that, and people will throw up a lot of roadblocks about it. So what is your view of looking at that kind of IT infrastructure as just like public infrastructure, like we would look at roads or bridges or something like that?
if you look at some applications, whether it's in your car or your phone, it is based on Wi-Fi, traffic information. It's mostly based in Wi-Fi. In other words, you know where the roadblocks are at before you get there. And then occasionally uses the macro cells for communication if necessary. But from a technical point of view, bear with me for a few seconds, but I would like to say there is no known technology today that will give you the kind of bandwidth that Wi-Fi can, except for Wi-Fi itself. In other words, you can eventually go to 100 megabit capacity in a wireless overlay that we typically call picocells. And in a confined area like Guam, you can easily do that here. We will have to design a few different handsets, but it will all be digital. Carrying voice through that system on the macro cell, somewhere along the line that gets converted to digital. But it does not get done on the handset level. But it's so easy to sample voice. It's really just 6 to 8K sampling, and you get the digital format of your voice, no problem. But eventually, I believe IP, Internet Protocol, will carry a lot of this load, assuming it has enough bandwidth, and Wi-Fi has that. The other thing is that it is more ubiquitous in terms of availability of the technology on Wi-Fi. There are a lot more Wi-Fi chips being sold out there versus the chips that the cell towers and so on use. It is infinitely cheaper. Some of the chips in the base stations, and I know because I had some companies serving that, a processor is about $400 or $500. You put it on a Wi-Fi system, and that's about $5. So there is a way to do that, and the towers you need don't need to be very high. And also, it is more fail-safe because you will design a mesh kind of network in your towers. So if one tower fails, you just go around it, and there's sufficient protocol that's well known for mesh. A base station, if that goes down, you wipe out an entire population in that region. Plus, it's an overkill for a lot of applications that we do, especially data. The expense on base stations for macrocell is the fact that you need to sync that voice or that data even at 120 miles per hour. You need atomic clock from base station to base station so that it's accurately tagged as you cross each cell. Wi-Fi is nomadic. You can have Wi-Fi while moving, but you don't need to be at 120 miles per hour every time. It is that speed that you have to sync that is costing a lot of cost uselessly. The thing is, a lot of developing countries adapt those technologies because they are available, even when it does not fit. I look at our energy problem. We base it on technologies coming from other countries, and the grid system was installed here in the Philippines, where we have thousands of islands, or in Guam you have many, many islands here. You need to disassemble that into more cost-effective systems. At least 40% of the cost of energy when you have an electric grid is the transmission. You don't need to transmit if you have isolated those into what I call picocells. So there's a lot of economies here to scale down, and yet you can still be serving the whole community in a much cheaper way. But that is the consequence when you do not have the ability to create your own technologies. You now have to borrow from other developed countries. You have no other option but to buy them. That's the problem also. From a societal point of view, the poor countries just have to adapt it because they cannot develop their own. Energy is a very good problem. In 4 centuries now, we've been paying for transmission systems, and you can isolate its community and generate its own power. Solar is expensive, we all know that, but if you take away that transmission, it is way cheaper than other means. So anyway, these are just apply technology the right way and it works. You can do that in Guam. You can do wireless stuff, picocells. Ubiquitous 30 megabits. We will give you the technology from the Philippines to go 6 kilometers at 30 megabits. It's instantiated. We've been demoing that, and the government will transfer this to private industry for selling, for manufacture, and do business. And there's a project that we're doing there where we could easily create the entire computing and communication infrastructure easily for a small area like one. For all the schools here to communicate, government, businesses, and so on and so on. Long answer, Robert, but you can see that.
Because the part, like in your interaction with the students earlier, the part here is that there are young people here who have never envisioned another model. And so the part here is to try to get them to envision that model. And that model will help solve sustainability issues on the island. And that model is both grounded in education and in education about technology and entrepreneurship and a kind of a social conscience. But that's, right now, almost every student I talk to, if you ask them about this, they're almost overwhelmed. They cannot imagine that they can do that.
Yeah.
But you're giving a sense that these things are doable, that they're possible.
Yeah.
And that's the power.
You mentioned that you are a venture capitalist. If our students, startup companies, for example, there's a possibility you can have an investment. And also, I'm a teacher. I care about my computer student. That's right now the only one engineering degree at University of Guam. And I hope we can have a long-time cooperation, bring our students to Silicon Valley like interns, and also, I think the Guam's economy rely on UOG because UOG has the most of talent. If UOG has no productivity, only consume money, then Guam's no go. Mm-hmm. So we need to start up from here. Technology engineering from computer science.
Yep.
And we want to bring us, our students, connect to Philippines, through the Philippines, to Asians rise up. One should not, we through China we have visa program. So Philippines, we have lots of people here. And lots of students are Philippines. So that you are the right person to help us. And
I'll be back.
read your experience, you said 9 out of 10 failure. That's true. When I took the physics class in University of Texas, he told me 95% reason for fail. You need your as a teacher to help us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. I have a little bit of my legacy here. No, seriously, my passion, not only in the Philippines, is actually many areas outside of the U.S. And likely Guam is on the way to Manila from California. So that's an easy stopover. Yeah. Now, I will clearly help. It's just a matter of scheduling it. And I truly mean this, by the way. When Dr. Underwood invited me, immediately I felt something here because my father was here as a contract worker. I would not be here talking to you this morning if he didn't come here. One way or another, I have to be back a little bit.
Thank you. Nice to see you. My question has to try to integrate some of the things that you've said. You first indicated, as I understand it, that when we see a problem, local people who have been trained to understand that problem are probably best suited to solve that problem, rather than bringing an external model and forcing it in on the system. So if we think about Guam or the Philippines in your case, the solution has been external, to bring the external model into the system. And as I understand what you're saying here, if you take people who understand that current local system, you then take them out, expose them to the issues so they learn how to solve the problems, but then they have to apply that locally, correct?
Yeah.
That's the model I understand.
Yeah.
So the process of education isn't merely learning how to solve the math problems, it's also the creative act of applying it in a different way.
Yep.
So I'm going to come from my class background and say, therefore, general education is really essential, as the chair of general education, to teach the creative process and to solve those problems rather than just the specific problem, but that larger issue, to connect to those larger issues. And as you spoke yesterday, what I found very interesting, your discussion about what you were doing in the elementary schools in the Philippines. And I don't know if we have time, but I thought that was really intriguing because it's something that could apply here that you would get along, I think. But thank you for your presentation and this larger education of going out but then coming back and giving back. I appreciate your effort.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the what we call Cloud Top project in the Philippines, where with a lot of Filipino engineers and some help from Silicon Valley, we have been in R&D for 1 year now on this infrastructure of computing and communication for all the elementary schools and high schools in the country. And when Dr. Underwood asked me, can we do that? I said, oh yeah, that's easy because you have a confined land mass. And you can apply that technology. The Department of Education, like a lot of other governments, want to equip classrooms with good automation, basically computers, to help the teachers teach better. But we took it to the next step because if you only give computers, that is not sustainable for an entire country. Because the cost of ownership is easily 3 to 5 times the acquisition cost whenever it is isolated. To solve that cost problem, you need to start with an architecture that where they are linked right away to where a lot of the intelligence is resident on a few systems that is controlled, that can be updated very quickly, but at a rate where it has enough capacity to compute a lot of things all at the same time, and it also assumes a high bandwidth connection so that the client or the stuff that the students see, the monitor and the keyboard and a few electronics in the back, does not have to do much computation. Because your typical laptop, of course, when we designed that, we loaded it up, we architected it to have a lot of capacity to compute, but it makes it more expensive. That is not necessary per student. And especially in the case of education, where the teacher teaches one topic, well, take that away from each computer, put it in the back somewhere, and just use that client, we call client-server architecture, on the desktop. The client is very cheap. And so you can replace that easily. And we do things for security reasons, we network it. But it is also enabled by communications. Without that high-speed communications, it would not work. So you have to do both at the same time. So a system that solves those problems is eminently more useful, plus also a lot cheaper. And that's that thing. You can do that easily here. Now you extend that to a community, to a small community, give them one tower, and then they have data communications right away. Because when the kid goes home and does homework, well, he still has to rely on that. And so, but you can easily distribute that to the community, all Wi-Fi. And it's easy from there to put voice, but we're not doing that right now, so it's not cluttered. So it's this thing about if you have the expertise to manipulate technology for that specific region or application, you are so much better, cheaper. And I keep telling this to the government and other, influential organizations in the Philippines. Do not just take existing solutions and apply it to your case because you are 7,000 islands. This grid system, I use that a lot as an example, it's useless. In a country where there are a lot of remote areas, oh my God, that's transmission is the high cost. Just distribute energy, and by the way, also a large nuclear plant or a coal-fired energy source, if that fails, the whole community is gone. Well, let's isolate that a little bit. Okay, well, that generator didn't work. That's what? 10 home, no problem. But if that fails, you have enough intelligence that you can automatically route energy from those existing ones to serve that. And so at Berkeley alone, we are working on energy systems that is so heavy on communication right away. A lot of intelligence is already embedded in the design such that we can have all backups all over the place, but they are all distributed. And that's just an example, by the way. There are many other things, different applications. That handset, yeah, it's super smart, but for a little kid, that's why pay all that money. You don't need to replace it, right?
Thank you once again, Dr. Banatao, everybody.
Okay, on behalf of the University of Guam, we use this for our presidential lectures. We'd like to present you with this as a memento of our appreciation, and hopefully that we'll keep it somewhere there in your office. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a challenge to all of these students that are out there. Think of that. Write it down on that napkin right now. Think about that. Grid problems, IT problems, things that have a technical solution, entrepreneurial possibilities. They're out there.
Thank you, everybody.